Melissa Graham yanked aside the curtain, shielding the first-class cabin window, as if the entire plane owed her an apology. And just minutes later, she would inadvertently sit in the exact seat belonging to a man she could never have imagined, confronting a man with the power to overhaul an entire airline, if he so wished. That day at Atlanta, Hartsfield, Jackson, the air was thick with the residue of a long-delayed day. The scent of cold coffee sweat and the frustration of hundreds of people mingled like a dense fog wrapping around every passenger. Melissa, 47, her face etched with fatigue after 3 consecutive days of meetings, stepped into the cabin with a stride that seemed capable of crushing the carpet. She did not look at her ticket, no need. In her mind, first class was always the domain of people like her, those who believed they had paid enough to place themselves above others. Seat 2. A appeared before her, like an oasis in a desert. Melissa eased into the chair, draped her expensive coat over the armrest, inhaled deeply, and allowed herself the small, fleeting sense of victory after a long, miserable day. But before that fragile calm could settle, footsteps echoed behind her, even and deliberate, yet carrying a chill so sharp that a few passengers instinctively turned their heads. Evan Marshall appeared like a bold pencil stroke, pulling the atmosphere of the cabin toward him. 39, wearing a fitted grey suit, every movement precise, leaving no detail exposed. But what made people look twice was not his impeccable appearance. It was the unusual stillness, as if he knew he needed to prove nothing to anyone. He stopped beside Melissa, eyes fixed on the seat she occupied. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low, weighty, anchoring itself in the air. "This seat is mine." 2A. Melissa did not glance at him. She gave a faint smirk, more arrogance than courtesy. "You're mistaken," she said, voice tired yet commanding. "You should check your ticket." Those around them fell silent. Some pretended to read ears straining, others paused their music. A sense that something was about to erupt swept the cabin like a cold gust. Evan's expression remained unchanged. He held up his ticket toward the approaching flight attendant. "Here is my ticket. 2A. The attendant bent down, checked it quickly, and her face subtly shifted as she looked at Melissa. "Ma'am, this is not your seat. This seat belongs to Mr. Marshall." Melissa turned away, clutching her coat, as if the seat were ancestral land. "I'm already seated." "Can't I have another?" Her words seemed ordinary, but carried a poisonous weight. A man in the row behind muttered, "Here we go again." Evan didn't react, except for a slight tightening of his jaw, the only sign he had heard her clearly. But what froze the cabin entirely was Melissa's next instinctive remark, a line that would unleash a wave she could not have foreseen. "Always. There's always someone trying to sit where they don't belong." She did not name names, no need. Everyone understood. The tension spread like electric current. A female student across the aisle looked up. A middle-aged man leaned slightly into the aisle. Every eye was on Evan to see his response. But Evan simply adjusted his sleeve, a small, controlled gesture. "I want to speak to the captain," he said so quietly that Melissa snorted in derision. "Speak to the captain? What do you think he has time for, to handle something so minor?" A few soft ohs echoed. Phones began to rise, half hidden, half exposed. The storm had formed. The cabin door opened. Captain Reynolds entered. Each step cut through the tense air. When he arrived, he did not look at Melissa nor at the flight attendant. He looked at Evan, and his face immediately radiated rare respect. "Mr. Marshall," the captain said, shaking his hand warmly, Good to see you again. We are waiting for your signal before takeoff." The cabin erupted in silent shock. Melissa froze. "Oh, you know him," she stammered. The captain turned to her eyes, sharp with impatience. "Of course. Mr. Evan Marshall is the CEO of this airline." The only sound was Melissa's quickened breath. She stood as if Seat 2A had become a hot coal. Her coat fell untouched. She stepped back, flustered, panicked, impossibly small. Evan seated himself with calm precision, as if he had witnessed this scene 1,000 times, and in truth he had. But this time something was different. As the cabin door closed, whispers spread like wind. "He's the CEO. What did she just do?" "That seat. It's really 2A. But Evan did not look at anyone. No retaliation. No satisfaction. He merely closed his eyes, relaxed, as if this were not a battle but a test life had given him too many times, and one he had passed, with that same composure, with the truth he did not need to speak, yet sufficient to shatter every prejudice in an instant. "You don't belong here." Those words still hung somewhere in the cabin. But this time the one underestimated was the most powerful person in the room. And the one who had spoken them was about to face the bitterest truth of their life. The first-class cabin seemed to hold its breath after the captain stepped away, leaving behind a silence so sharp it felt like it was slicing into Melissa's pride. Falls happen in the dark, but this fall, Melissa Graham's fall, unfolded under the harsh white lights of the cabin, before dozens of watchful eyes, and worse, in front of the cameras of numerous phones recording every moment. Melissa slumped into a seat a few rows back, her hands trembling, as if her nervous system had been jolted by the whispers spreading across the cabin. Each murmur was like a small blade light, but deep. What did she just say? Telling him he's sitting where he doesn't belong. Oh my God, and he's the CEO. Those words cut through Melissa's mind, but the harsher truth was that she couldn't refute them. She could not justify herself. She could not erase her words from the video that some passengers had been secretly recording from the first second. Everything spun in her head, like a storm suddenly unleashed in mid-air. In the row ahead, Evan Marshall quietly adjusted his seatbelt. Every movement was precise, composed without a trace of triumph. Not a single glance back, not a single expression of satisfaction, and it was precisely that calmness that made the cabin stir even more. A young female student across the aisle murmured, "He's so composed. If it were me, I'd be shattered." The man in 4B whispered to his wife, "That is real class. No yelling, no one-upmanship needed." But Melissa, stiff in her seat, could hear it all. And the more they praised him, the smaller she felt, shrinking into a distorted shadow of herself, a woman revealing the ugliest part of who she was in a brief moment, enough to undo the image she had painstakingly built over years. The chief flight attendant returned to check the cabin, but this time she avoided looking at Melissa, steering clear as if avoiding a traffic accident that had just occurred. She adjusted her scarf, approached Evan, and inclined her head slightly. "Mr. Marshall, on behalf of the entire crew." "We apologize for the earlier incident," Evan replied with a small smile, more tired than reproachful. "It's all right. I just hope the flight goes smoothly." His words struck Melissa in a strange way, not because he had forgiven her, but because he did not need to forgive her, because he did not see her as important enough to be angry at. That very indifference, indifferent in a cold, authoritative way, made the shame in her chest burn hotter. The cabin began preparations for takeoff. Passengers fastened their seat belts. The indicator lights turned on. The plane rumbled slightly as it began to taxi onto the runway. But within Melissa, an earthquake rumbled quietly. She turned to the window, yet the reflection of herself was harder to face than the night outside. She remembered her own words, the tone with which she had spoken, the way she had looked at Evan, as if he had trespassed into forbidden territory. But the image of that man calmly sitting in his rightful seat, not shouting that he was the CEO, not demanding privileges, made her painfully aware that the only person who had actually trespassed was herself. As the plane accelerated for takeoff, a sudden thought shot through Melissa's mind like an electric shock. If the video gets out, what will happen to me? Her career, her reputation. The social mask she had worn for 20 years. A young female passenger behind whispered to her companion, "She's done for. That video will spread. Yeah, it'll probably end up on TikTok. And the CEO too. Oh my God." Melissa clenched her jaw. She did not look back to face them. She did not dare. Meanwhile, Evan opened the aviation magazine in front of him, as if the world outside held no concern. Yet in his eyes, if anyone was perceptive enough to notice, there was a fatigue that reached to the very core. Not because of women like Melissa, not because of her words, but because he had faced this scenario too many times for composure to be a choice. It had become a survival mechanism. The captain announced the plane was ready for takeoff. The cabin trembled slightly. Some passengers leaned back, some closed their eyes. Only two people in two separate seats, in two contrasting states of mind, looked straight ahead, as if, in that moment, their lives were opening to a new chapter. Evan thought about today's journey, about the meetings awaiting him in Dallas, about new projects for the airline, and about once again having to serve as an inadvertent model of endurance and emotional control. Melissa. She thought about the worst-case scenario. Had the video already been uploaded? Could she salvage anything? Could she return to a normal life after this brief but catastrophic moment? No one spoke, but both knew the confrontation in first class today was not over. It had only just begun. And as the plane lifted from the ground, the world below waited to witness the next chapter, a story Melissa could never have imagined, in which she became the antagonist, and Evan unintentionally became the symbol of something far larger than himself. The plane had leveled off at cruising altitude, yet the atmosphere in first class still carried an invisible tremor, as if the echoes of the earlier storm lingered somewhere between the cabin ceiling and the silent glances. No one spoke aloud, but everyone was thinking the same thing. Melissa knew it. And the more she knew, the more her body felt compressed like a box crushed in the hands of a stranger. She shivered as the seat in the row ahead adjusted. It was just Evan reclining slightly to relax, but to Melissa, the sound was like a hammer tapping against glass, each beat reminding her of her own mistake. Evan was different. He tried to focus on the aviation magazine in front of him, but the content could not penetrate his mind. The black and white pages slid past his eyes like static noise. He knew very well what was happening behind him. Without turning, he still sensed the awkward glances, the hushed whispers, and the rising anxiety spreading from Melissa's row throughout the cabin. But he did not want to dwell on it. Not anymore. Not again. Evan had once told himself, "Not everyone needs to understand you." But the moment Melissa had let that comment slip, the truth stabbed him like an old blade, familiar, yet never painless. He had learned to face it, to remain unreactive, to let the truth speak for itself. But the hardest part was learning not to bring moments like this home at night. And today that task was harder than usual. The flight attendant returned to serve drinks. Her eyes swept past Melissa, then hesitated for a moment, awkward yet cautious. When she approached Evan, her hands trembled slightly. "What would you like?" Sir Evan looked up, offering a reassuring, faint smile. "Just water, thank you." That smile made the flight attendant exhale in relief, but it made Melissa clamp her eyes shut. She could not bear the stark contrast on one side, gentle courtesy that made others feel safe. On the other, herself, a woman who had exposed the ugliest part of herself in public. A young man in 3D pretended to adjust his phone, but he was actually reviewing the video he had just recorded. The light from the screen reflected on his face, his eyes widening, a soft exhale escaping. "This is definitely going viral." Melissa heard it clearly. Her ears burned. She straightened in her seat and drew a deep breath. Perhaps she should apologize. At least a word. Something. But every time she imagined herself standing before him, a CEO, to apologize, her throat tightened. Her pride would not allow it. Or more accurately, her blind arrogance would not allow it. Yet fear whispered in her ear, "If you do not apologize, it will get worse." Ahead, Evan had noticed the subtle shift in the air, the small pauses as Melissa mustered courage, the times she half rose then sat again. He did not look, yet he felt it clearly. A part of him, the softer human part he had long buried, stirred slightly. Not pity. Understanding. He had seen too many moments where people were defeated by themselves. Melissa was now a vivid example. Finally she stood. Uncertain. Not strong. Just out of hiding. She stepped slowly toward seat 2A. Her back felt as if weighted with steel, her hands cold as ice. A few passengers glanced up, waiting to see how this scene would unfold. Evan set down his magazine. He turned his head when he heard her steps stop beside him. Melissa swallowed dryly, her voice hoarse. Just one sentence, and it was already difficult. About earlier, Evan looked at her, his gaze neither cold nor simple, a calmness that made the other person feel even smaller. "I understand," he replied. The words surprised Melissa. She had not yet apologized, but he interrupted gently, yet sharply, as a thin blade. "No." She shook her head. "I was wrong." Those words made a few nearby passengers gasp, holding their breath. "I judged you." Her lips trembled. "I truly apologize." Evan did not react for a long beat. Melissa felt time freeze around her, her heart pounding, as if trying to break free from her chest. Then Evan tilted his head, observing her in silence, long enough for her to feel he was weighing whether that apology was truly an apology, or just fear of being judged. Finally he nodded slightly. "I hear you. There was no, 'I forgive you.' No, it's all right. Just those 2 words. Yet they were enough to make Melissa sink further. She returned to her seat, sitting with the sensation of having passed through a storm for which she herself had been the cause. She wished it would end there, hoped the story would stop in this cabin. But the world does not operate according to the wishes of someone trying to escape consequences. And the moment Melissa sat down was the moment the phone of the young man in 3D lit up with a new notification. "Your clip is trending, plus 12,000 views." He blinked, glanced at the screen, then at Evan, then at Melissa, trembling. The storm was coming, and it was not the kind of storm a plane could avoid. A soft ding sounded, signaling the crew had begun serving snacks. But no one in first class paid attention to the coffee or cookies being passed around. All eyes were fixed on what was happening on the phone of the young man in row 3 Dow. A moment even he did not expect would ignite the storm about to unfold. On the screen was a 15-second clip, starting with Melissa's sarcastic remark, then the moment she refused to leave seat 2A, and ending with the captain shaking Evan's hand and declaring, "Mr. Marshall is the CEO of this airline." Fast forward. Clear. Enough to set social media ablaze if it escaped the cabin. The young man swallowed unconsciously, then shivered as the top corner of the screen lit up 42,000 views in 8 minutes. No algorithm needed. This was the kind of video that did not need promotion. It spread on its own like fire catching gasoline. Melissa did not know that. But she felt something else. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted in a way she couldn't control. The gazers were no longer merely curious or irritated. They carried a new layer of emotion evaluation, judgment, definition, and somewhere a cold pity. That kind of pity destroys dignity faster than any insult could. Melissa gripped the armrest, trying to steady her breathing, but she knew what was coming. Very near. Evan in the row ahead still sat upright, his posture unusually calm. But deep inside, a subtle wave passed through his chest, a wave that only occurs when he senses something approaching at a speed he cannot avoid. He did not want the situation to become the center of attention, did not want anyone publicly humiliated, did not want the truth about his position exploited as a shield or a weapon, but he also could not avoid one truth. What happened today was not just a story about 2 people, it was a mirror, a crack. Once again, proof of what he had witnessed far too many times in his life. The flight attendant brought the coffee to Evan, placing the cup gently on his tray. "Sir, we sincerely apologize for what happened." Evan raised a hand, interrupting gently. No need to repeat it. His tone was not cold, but decisive. Not because he did not care, but because he did not want Melissa to self-destruct any further right here. But Melissa heard it, every word, and the phrase, "no need to repeat it," cut into her pride like a blade. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, as if a drowning person grasped for a last breath. Unbelievably, yet almost instinctively, she opened Twitter. The homepage refreshed. She scrolled. Bold letters hit her eyes. "CEO's seat stolen on Atlanta flight, shocking outcome." Her throat tightened. She did not dare open the article, but her hands moved on their own. The screen displayed a clip. The camera angle looked very familiar, impossibly familiar. No, it couldn't be. But it was. It was her video, her voice, her words. People like him always try to sit where they don't belong. Posted by an anonymous account, but below thousands of comments had already erupted, and the number was climbing by the second. Melissa felt her stomach tighten as if being crushed. She dropped the phone into her lap hands, shaking so badly she could not clench them into fists. She had just become the antagonist in a story she did not fully understand, yet could not escape. Evan heard the sharp intake of breath behind him. He did not turn. He did not want to shame her further. But he knew that that moment, the moment a person realizes they are exposed to the world, was one of the most painful moments of their life. In row 3D, the young man whispered unconsciously, "Oh my God, it's already on the news site." A woman across the aisle murmured, "She's done for." The man beside her replied in a cold tone, "Serves her right." Evan closed his eyes. A heavy feeling washed over his chest. Not joy, not satisfaction, but disappointment. Disappointment in a world too quick to judge, too slow to understand, and too cruel with human error. He opened his eyes and called the flight attendant over, in a voice so soft Melissa almost could not hear. "I want to speak to the passenger in row 5C. "Privately." Melissa startled. That was her seat. Her legs felt weak, as if they could collapse at any moment. She stepped to row 2, heart-pounding so hard her ears rang. She stopped in front of him, swallowed dryly. Evan looked her in the eye. Not angry, not scornful, not proud. Just the gaze of someone who had seen this world too often and was too weary to hate anyone further. He spoke slowly, clearly, and as sharp as a cold blade. "Do you know what the worst part of today is?" Melissa opened her mouth but could not speak. Evan continued immediately, as if he had carried this truth inside him for a long time. "It's not that you were wrong. Everyone is wrong sometimes. The worst part is that you believed I didn't belong where I was sitting." In that moment, the moment those words landed, the cabin fell into absolute silence. A silence that only occurs when truth touches not just one person, but strikes at the invisible wounds of everyone witnessing. The small ding echoed, signaling the crew had begun serving light refreshments, but no one in first class paid attention to the coffee or cookies being passed around. All eyes were fixed on what was happening on the phone of the young man in row 3C, a moment even he did not anticipate would spark the storm about to unfold. On the screen was a 15-second clip, beginning with Melissa's sarcastic remark, followed by her refusal to leave seat 2A, and ending with the captain shaking Evan's hand and declaring, "Mr. Marshall is the CEO of this airline." Fast forward, clear. Enough to set the online world on fire if it escaped the cabin. The young man swallowed unconsciously, then goosebumps ran across his arms as the top corner of the screen lit up 42,000 views in 8 minutes. No algorithm needed. This was a video that promoted itself. It spread like fire on gasoline. Melissa did not know that. But she sensed something else. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted in a way she could not control. The gazes were no longer simply curious or irritated. They carried a new layer of emotion, evaluation, definition, judgment. And somewhere, a cold pity, the kind that destroys dignity faster than any insult ever could. Melissa gripped the armrest, trying to keep her breathing even, but she knew what was coming. Very near. Evan in the row ahead still sat upright, his posture unusually composed, but deep inside, a subtle wave moved through his chest, the kind that only appears when he senses something approaching, at a speed he cannot avoid. He did not want the incident to become the center of attention, did not want anyone publicly shamed, did not want the truth of his position used as a shield or weapon. But he could not avoid one fact. What happened today was not just the story of two people. It was a mirror, a crack. Once again, proof of what he had witnessed too many times in his life. The flight attendant placed a cup of coffee in front of Evan, setting it gently on his tray. "Sir, we sincerely apologize for what occurred." Evan raised a hand, interrupting softly. No need to repeat it. His tone was not cold, but decisive. Not because he did not care, but because he did not want Melissa to self-destruct further right here. Melissa heard it. Every word. And the phrase, "no need to repeat it," tore through her pride like a knife. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, as if a drowning person grasped for a last breath. Unbelievably, almost instinctively, she opened Twitter. The home page refreshed. She scrolled down. Bold letters struck her eyes. CEO's seat stolen on Atlanta flight, shocking outcome. Her throat tightened. She did not dare open the article yet. Her hands moved on their own. The screen displayed a clip. The camera angle looked very familiar, impossibly familiar. No, it couldn't be. But it was. It was her video, her voice, her words. People like him always try to sit where they don't belong. Posted by an anonymous account, but below thousands of comments had already erupted, and the numbers were rising by the second. Melissa felt her stomach tighten as if being crushed. She dropped the phone into her lap, her hands shaking so badly she could not clench them into fists. She had just become the antagonist in a story she did not fully understand, yet couldn't escape. Evan heard the sharp intake of breath behind him. He didn't turn. He did not want to humiliate her further. But he knew that moment, the moment a person realizes they are exposed to the world, was one of the most painful of their life. In row 3C, the young man whispered unconsciously, "Oh my God, it's already on news sites." A woman across the aisle murmured, "She's done for," the man beside her replied in a cold tone. "Serves her right." Evan closed his eyes. A heavy feeling pressed on his chest. Not joy, not satisfaction, but disappointment. Disappointment in a world too quick to judge, too slow to understand, and too cruel with human error. He opened his eyes and called the flight attendant over, in a voice so soft Melissa almost could not hear. "I want to speak to the passenger in row 5C. Privately." Melissa startled. That was her seat. Her legs felt weak, as if they could collapse at any moment. She stepped to row 2, heart pounding so hard her ears rang. She stopped in front of him, swallowing dryly. Evan looked her in the eye, not angry, not scornful, not proud. Just the gaze of someone who had seen this world too many times and was too weary to hate anyone further. He spoke slowly, clearly, and as sharp as a cold blade. "Do you know what the worst part of today is?" Melissa opened her mouth but could not speak. Evan continued immediately, as if he had carried this truth inside him for a long time. "It's not that you were wrong. Everyone is wrong sometimes. The worst part is that you believed I didn't belong where I was sitting." In that moment, the moment those words landed, the cabin fell into absolute silence. A silence that only occurs when truth touches not just one person, but strikes at the invisible wounds of everyone witnessing. Outside the window, the sky darkened into an endless deep blue, while the first-class cabin was bathed in the soft golden light, often called the light of serenity. But no one was at peace. Not Evan, not Melissa, and certainly not the passengers glued to their phones watching the numbers under the video climb at an unstoppable pace. In row 3D, the young man swallowed for the 5th time. The clip he had just uploaded, a blink of an eye-short video, was now escalating out of control. He brought the phone closer to his eyes, heart pounding. 152,000 views, 15,300 shares, 2,400 comments, all in less than half an hour. He turned to the female student next to him, voice shaking in shock. I think I just set this off like a storm." She gasped, eyes on the screen, then glanced at Evan, sitting directly ahead. "Should you delete it?" He bit his lip. Too late. Someone else already reposted it. They were not the only ones who knew. Melissa knew too. She held her phone hands shaking, as if electricity ran through each joint. The screen lit up with new notifications. Every ding felt like a stab. A new article, an analysis video, a venomous comment. She skimmed the first few lines. Woman disrespects CEO in first class, bias revealed in just 10 seconds. She said, "You don't belong here," to the airline's president himself. A lesson in prejudice. You never know who is sitting next to you. Melissa raised the phone to her face, covering her mouth. Not to cry, but to prevent a choked sound from attracting the cabin's attention. She thought about her work, the marketing team expecting her back on Monday, the professional image she had cultivated for years. And then she saw a tweet tagged with her full name, Melissa Graham, Senior Marketing Consultant. They had found her LinkedIn in just 1 hour. Melissa sank into her seat, as if the weight of the entire sky pressed against her chest. She closed her eyes, but the truth shone brightly behind her tightly shut lids. Meanwhile, Evan remained silent, hands resting on the table palms, touching as if holding on to a fragment of his own peace. The flight attendant glanced at him several times each time, as if she wanted to speak but refrained. Not because they feared him, but because they knew anything said now could touch a more sensitive point than the earlier incident. Evan was the first to break the silence. He reclined, slightly eyes toward the small window. Below the city, stretched out like veins of light. But his mind was heavy as stone. He did not want to become the center of attention, did not want Melissa to be torn apart by the internet, did not want a human story turned into entertainment for millions. But he knew well that once the internet saw blood, it would not stop. Another notification appeared. "Hi Evan, the clip is spreading fast. Would you like us to handle media?" Evan exhaled lightly. Media. Right, he was the CIO, and he could not escape that, no matter how much he wanted to. But what weighed on him was not the airline's image. It was the single question clear in his mind. This time, will anyone truly understand the meaning of what happened, or will it all be swallowed by the spectacle machine? Behind him, Melissa seemed to melt into nothing. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands covering her face. Her cheeks burned. Her heart pounded with each bitter comment. A soft female voice came from row 5B, a stranger, but perhaps sympathetic in the way people feel for an inevitable collapse. "Are you okay?" Melissa nodded, but it was the weakest lie of her life. The woman whispered, "You should know everyone makes mistakes, but this one is going to spread fast." Melissa blinked, whispering as if lost. "What should I do now?" The woman sighed. "Hope it doesn't spread further. But I'm afraid it's already out of our hands." Melissa trembled, not from fear of the world, but because for the first time in her life she was staring at the ugliest part of herself, the part she had masked with false confidence for so many years. Up ahead, Evan heard fragments of that exchange. His eyes half closed, not to avoid looking at Melissa in despair, but because he was weighing two thoughts, one to stand and say something to ease her pain, two to not interfere, because sometimes intervening too soon only heightens humiliation. He chose silence. Silent but not indifferent. Silent but aware. Silent but observant. And then what no one wanted happened. The young man in row 3D blurted out loudly, unable to cover his mouth, "Oh my God, it's trending nationwide." The cabin jolted. Melissa froze. Evan opened his eyes. The flight attendant dropped the napkin she was holding. The young man looked up, face pale. "The video is top trending nationwide." He glanced around, voice shaking. And there's even a slow-motion version. Above 30,000 feet in the calm sea of clouds, an undercurrent had officially risen. and it was heading straight for Melissa Graham. Chaos is never loud at first. It begins with small numbers. Numbers Melissa hoped were just a mistake. But as the plane continued on its journey, those numbers swelled, warped, and ultimately consumed her like a monster she had unwittingly awakened. 20 minutes after the trending shout, the phones of other passengers began to vibrate. Not just one, but dozens. A message appeared on the screen of the man in row 4. B. Hey, are you on the flight with the CEO seat stealing incident? Crazier woman in 3. A opened Facebook and saw a screenshot of Melissa's flushed face with a cruel caption, "The face you make when you accidentally insult the CEO thinking they're just another passenger." An elderly couple in 1C exchanged confused glances as their son sent them the video. "Mum and Dad, you're on this flight." "Right, did you see that woman?" Melissa buried her face in her hands, shoulders trembling with each pulse as her phone kept lighting up. She wanted to turn it off, throw it away, disappear. Then one message froze her blood. "Melissa, what is happening? The company is in an emergency meeting. Send a Tracy, HR director." Melissa lifted her head as if slapped. She looked around. The cabin shrank. The air thickened. She tried to breathe, but her breath caught in her chest. A voice whispered nearby, small but piercing through the cabin air. "If she were my boss, I'd quit immediately." Another voice from a different row answered, "I don't even know what she does, but she's probably fired." Melissa squeezed her eyes shut. "Oh God, what have I done?" Instinctively she heard the seat ahead shift. Evan leaned slightly, not looking at her directly, but it was clear he knew her state had passed the limits of normal human endurance. He considered. 1 second. 2 seconds. Then he spoke, loud enough for Melissa to hear, soft enough that no one else would think he was intervening excessively. "You should drink some water." Melissa opened her eyes. His voice was not reproachful, not cold, not distant. It was simply a statement between two human beings, not CEO, not troublemaker, not superior. She nodded slightly. The flight attendant quickly handed her the glass, but her hands shook so much the water sloshed to the rim. She took a sip. It was more bitter than anything she had ever tasted. The murmuring in the cabin began transforming into live news. Aviation Alert news platform has posted it. Evening news channels will surely cover it. The company's youngest CEO publicly disrespected. Evan heard it all. He understood the domino effect better than anyone on the plane. A minor incident, if captured at the right moment at the right angle with the right person, was no longer minor, especially when the person in the video was the airline's CEO, and the other person was a passenger who had spoken the heaviest words by accident. He leaned his head against the seatback fingers, tapping lightly on the armrest. Not frustration. Calculation. Not a PR calculation, but a human calculation. Inside him, two parts were in conflict. The first, the CEO part, concerned for the airline's image, maintaining professionalism, ensuring the incident did not become a major scandal. The second, the human part, recognizing the woman behind him, was experiencing a collapse no one should have to face alone. Evan exhaled softly. He turned his head slightly, meeting Melissa's eyes. She looked at him like someone sliding off a cliff, clinging to anything to avoid falling, not seeking forgiveness, not offering excuses, just fear. Fear in its rawest, most naked form. He spoke slowly. "You cannot control the internet, but you can control what happens next." Melissa swallowed. "You mean what? Don't let the world define you by those 10 seconds in that video. His gaze carried no arrogance, only a reminder. A truth Melissa needed to hear, even if she was not ready. And still those words made her cry. Not loudly, just quietly, instantly. She turned to the window, wiping her tears, not wanting anyone to see. But the cabin was too small. Everyone saw. Outside, patches of cloud were sliced by moonlight into silver streaks. Inside, a human being was being torn apart by the internet, while still thousands of feet above the ground, mid-flight. Evan watched her for a moment longer, then returned to his seat. He knew that when the plane landed, the wave Melissa was trembling in would turn into a flood. And he also knew very clearly that his presence in this story would not end in the cabin. The story would escalate, it would distort, it would be discussed, analyzed, quoted, and twisted to generate engagement. Evan had maintained silence for years as CEO. He did not like the spotlight. He did not like media explosions. He did not like becoming a symbol. But this time the spotlight did not ask him. It came on its own, blazing, hot enough to ignite everything it touched. In that exact moment, Evan's phone lit up again. An internal email. The board wants to meet with you immediately upon landing. He closed his eyes. The bigger explosion was waiting below the night sky. When the wheels of the plane touched down at Dallas Love Field, a soft thump echoed the ordinary sound heard by thousands of passengers every day. But for Melissa Graham, it felt like the final door slamming shut behind her. She had no way back, no fragile hope that the story from the planes would quietly die. As the plane began to slow, the screens of the phones around her lit up simultaneously like stars in the night. Everyone was waiting to see what had just happened with the video of the woman insulting the CEO, and as updates came in, the internet responded immediately. #Seat2, a #CIO incident, #Melissa Graham, the top 3 trending hashtags. Melissa felt her spine chill, not from the air conditioning, but from a primal fear, the fear of being exposed to the eyes of the entire world. She tried to breathe deeply, but the air would not reach her lungs. Every vibration of a phone felt like a needle piercing her brain. She looked at the screen, instinct compelling her to check, even though she knew each glance would make her heart sink further. Messages from HR had multiplied into 7 missed calls. A new email, your case is under review. Please contact us as soon as possible. Melissa closed the phone as if it had just burned her hands. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dallas. Please remain seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop. But no one listened. All eyes were on Evan. Evan unfastened his seatbelt, a simple motion. But in that moment, it was like the eye of a storm rising. The chief flight attendant approached, inclining her head slightly. Mr. Marshall, the airline's security and media teams are waiting for you at the gate. Evan nodded lightly. Thank you. The words soft as they were spread through the cabin like a domino effect. Everything had already spiraled beyond control. Melissa swallowed hard. If the airline's media team was waiting, that meant this incident was no longer just a viral video. It had become an official event, a crisis PR situation that even the CEO could not avoid. Her mind flashed to the worst-case scenario: she could lose her job, be permanently labeled, be seen by the world as a symbol of prejudice. And it had all started with a single, careless, exhausted remark, far too bad for anyone to excuse. Evan stood. The cabin light fell on his shoulders, steady calm, almost unyielding. No anger, no pride. Only the weariness of a man preparing to face an urgent meeting he could neither ignore nor postpone. Melissa watched him step into the aisle. A small voice inside urged her. You should apologize. One last time, sincerely, not to repair her reputation, not to seek forgiveness, but to do the right thing, at least once on this terrible day. She stood trembling and stepped into the aisle. Mr. Marshall. Her voice was hoarse, nearly strangled. Evan paused, turning his head. Not cold, not defiant, just a quiet, waiting silence. I know no apology is enough. Melissa's tears began to fall, even as she tried to swallow each drop. But you are right, I misjudged. I judged too quickly, and I judged too harshly. She lowered her head. I am truly sorry, not for the video, not for the consequences, but for saying that even when no one was recording. In that moment, Evan looked at her, really looked for a long time, as if carefully weighing every word Melissa had just spoken. This was no longer the apology of someone afraid. This was the apology of someone facing themselves. Thank you, he said softly. Just 2 words. Nothing more. But Melissa felt those 2 words save her from completely falling into the abyss. Suddenly the plane's intercom rang again. Passengers may now disembark. The door opened. Light from the jetway poured into the cabin. And out there stood the airline's media security and board representatives in a long line. Everyone looked at Evan. Everyone waited for him. Melissa raised her hand to cover her mouth. Oh God, she had underestimated him. She had underestimated everything behind him. Evan stepped out of the cabin. The aisle flashed with light. Not paparazzi, but internal staff, airline media, and board representatives recording every moment. Everything revolved around him, a young CEO calmly walking away from the incident, preparing to face the brewing public storm. Melissa stayed just behind the exit, tucked into a small corner. No one noticed her. No one called her name. No one asked about her. But the phones held high across the cabin were showing her face, at the very worst moment of her life. And Melissa understood more deeply than ever before that the real storm had only just begun. The terminal at Dallas Love Field had never been this tense. Not noisy, not chaotic, but an uncanny silence. The silence of staring eyes of all attention, focused on a single point, Evan Marshall, walking out of the plane cabin with an almost unbelievable calm on his face. Behind him was a long line of media staff and board representatives, each holding a device camera recorder tablet, all pointed at him, as if he were the centerpiece of an urgent PR campaign no one had time to prepare for. Evan walked with measured, deliberate steps, neither fast nor slow. Yet beneath that composed exterior, his mind was processing thousands of details at once, emotions, public reaction, consequences, staff, and even Melissa, the poor woman, shrinking against the wall near the exit, looking like a shadow swallowed by the airport lights. As soon as Evan reached the waiting area, 3 people approached immediately. The head of communications, face tense and hurried, the legal director eyes sharp and calculating, and the chairman of the board, an older man with a heavy expression. Evan, the chairman, said softly, voice taut as a string, we need to speak. Immediately. Evan nodded. No resistance, no surprise. He knew this was bigger than anyone imagined. At the same time, phones all around kept lighting up. Passengers who had just left the plane could not look away. Everyone was watching the same video, the same words, the same moment. And the comment lines exploded. CEO handled that perfectly. That woman is the tragedy of her own making. Prejudice still runs rampant in modern life. She needs to be fired. A costly lesson. Melissa heard it all. Each comment felt like a blade cutting into her flesh. She stood trembling against the wall. No one looked at her. No one called her name. No one asked a word. But the very disregard made her feel so small, she wanted to disappear from the planet. She breathed hard, trying to stay calm. She wanted to escape, to hide in the restroom, to turn off her phone, to cry, to scream, to rewind time to the moment she had stepped onto the plane and smack herself awake from the foolish arrogance that had brought her here. Evan glanced at her for exactly 1 second. 1 single second. But it was enough for Melissa to know he harbored no resentment, no anger, no intention to crush her with power or circumstance. He just looked as if he saw a part of himself, a part he had once been before he had a CEO seat, before he had learned to control his emotions amidst the storms of the world. Then he turned and walked into the makeshift meeting room the airline had set up in the VIP area. The door closed. Melissa stood outside, hands clenched until they were white. Inside the room, the atmosphere was even heavier than the terminal outside. On the large screen was the video replaying from the beginning in HD. The sound was clear enough to hear someone in the back row take a deep breath. The board watched Evan in silence. No reproach, no questioning, just waiting. Evan folded his arms, eyes on the video again. He did not enjoy watching it. He felt uneasy seeing human actions distorted through a lens. But he endured. He did not evade. When the video ended, the head of communications spoke first. "This is spreading fast. Very fast. Major news outlets are requesting interviews. Everyone wants an official statement from you." The legal director interjected, "If we don't handle this carefully, we could face a serious image crisis. Bias, discrimination, passenger conduct, every detail is being analyzed down to the millimeter." Evan looked at them, voice deep and slow but steady. "I do not want to speak to the press. Not right now." The room went completely silent. The chairman tilted his head. Voice measured Evan. "If you stay silent, the internet will create its own story." Evan responded immediately. "And if I speak, they will twist my words to suit their narrative. I will speak when necessary, but not now." His tone was not harsh, but it radiated effortless authority, the authority of someone who knows exactly what he is doing. The chairman nodded slowly. "Very well. What do you propose?" Evan exhaled lightly. "One, protect the flight attendants and crew. They followed the procedures correctly. To ensure that no one harms that woman any further." The second statement drew surprised looks from everyone in the room. The head of communications asked softly, "You mean Melissa Graham?" Evan nodded lightly. She was wrong, but no one deserves to be crushed for a single moment. The internet is ruthless. Do not let it tear her apart. The meeting room fell silent again, this time not from shock but out of respect. The chairman looked at Evan for a long moment. "You are truly different, Evan." He smiled faintly. "Not different, just experienced enough to understand." Outside the VIP room, Melissa sank onto the bench. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from her closest friend, Mel. "3 news outlets have already used your photo. Are you okay?" She gasped, lungs tightening, eyes blurring in a fleeting 10-second moment. She raised her hand to cover half her face, trying to catch her breath like someone drowning. Then a gentle hand rested on her shoulder. Melissa jerked and turned. It was Evan. No bodyguards, no media, no board members. Just Evan, one human standing in front of another. He looked at her for a long moment. No blame, no pressure, no lecture. Just a gaze that made Melissa's tears fall again, unable to hold them back. Evan spoke softly enough for only the two of them to hear. You have to be strong. The internet will not calm down, but you do not have to face it alone. Melissa choked her voice, breaking, "Can you help me?" Evan squeezed her shoulder lightly. Tomorrow we will handle this the right way. In that moment, under the cold white lights of the arrivals terminal, a moment that Melissa never expected the person she had underestimated was the only one reaching out when the whole world seemed ready to push her down. The next morning, Dallas was bathed in a thin layer of pale golden sunlight, a kind of calm that Melissa Graham could no longer feel. She had stayed awake all night, could not sleep, could not eat, could not think of anything but two words: life. She had ruined it in a single moment. Her phone kept buzzing throughout the morning. Messages, comments, emails, press notifications. Everything came crashing down like a flood. She looked in the hotel mirror, a pale face, tangled hair eyes, swollen from crying. There was no trace of the sharp, confident, authoritative woman she had once been. Instead, there was a person being crushed from the inside by herself. Then the phone rang again. Caller Evan Marshall. Melissa held her breath. She hesitated a second, 2 seconds, then she answered. Evan's voice was deep but gentle. Do you have a moment? We need to talk before this story goes any further. Melissa agreed. Not out of duty, not out of fear, but because she did not know anyone else who could pull her back from this abyss other than the man she had insulted. 30 minutes later, they met in a small meeting room at the Airline's branch headquarters. No cameras, no press, no board members, just two people, one about to lose everything, and one willing to protect what no one thought he would care about. Evan sat across from Melissa, his demeanor calm eyes, non-judgmental. Yet his silence made Melissa choke back emotion. She spoke first, voice trembling as if about to break. I don't know what's going to happen to me. Evan exhaled softly. The internet is unforgiving, but what matters is not what they think of you today, but what you do next. Melissa bowed her head. Tears fell onto the table one by one. I did something foolish, something terrible. I regret it. Truly regret it. Evan looked at her for a moment longer, then said something Melissa had never expected. I will speak to the media. Melissa flinched, looking up. You don't have to do that for me. Evan shook his head slightly. I am not doing it for you. I am doing it because it is the right thing. That video is turning the story into entertainment for others, but it does not reflect the full truth. Melissa wiped her tears, choking on her words. And the truth is that I insulted you, Evan replied, voice low but sharp. And the truth is, you recognized your mistake. He looked her directly in the eyes. One bad moment does not define a person unless they let it. Melissa cried this time, not out of fear, but out of relief. No one online had given her this chance. No one in the company had given her this chance. But Evan, the person she had thought she could belittle, was the only one who saw her as human, not as a symbol of her worst. Evan stood. He pulled out his phone notes, ready. We will issue a joint statement. Melissa blinked, confused. Joe joint, yes. Evan said clearly, each word deliberate. You will apologize publicly. I will say that this is an opportunity for us to learn about respect and patience in stressful times. He paused, adding, And I will say that I, as CEO, accept that apology and ask everyone to stop attacking you." Melissa exhaled, tears streaming. The messages she had received overnight were all insults, curses, and harsh attacks. But here was the only hand extended to her. Evan reviewed the draft. No defense, no blame, no boasting. Just a humane reminder. Respect is not granted based on appearance. It is given, and it can be restored through kind actions. Melissa nodded slightly. "Thank you, Evan. I don't know what else to say." Evan tilted his head. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself for having the courage to face it." 2 hours later, the joint statement was released. Social media erupted again, but this time differently. Many were stunned to see the CEO defend the person who had insulted him. A new wave of comments appeared, handling this so humanely. Never expected a CEO to be so forgiving. Everyone makes mistakes. She's only human. And for the first time in 24 hours, the rate of attacking comments against Melissa decreased, not gone completely, but reduced. Enough for her to breathe. At the end of the day, Evan left headquarters standing in the parking lot, watching the Texas sunset paint the sky red. The day had been long, exhausting, heavy, but he knew he had done the right thing. Melissa called him a short call to say just one sentence. "You saved me from myself. Thank you." Evan replied softly, "Don't let the worst moment of your life define you. Your story is not over." He hung up, leaving behind the sunset, and a lesson the entire world had witnessed. Arrogance can make us stumble. Haste can hurt others. But kindness, even when we are wronged, can save a person. In the end, the story of Seat 2A is not about power, not about prejudice, not about a viral video. It is the story of two people, one who accidentally caused harm, and one strong enough not to respond with resentment. And both walked away from that flight with a new understanding in their hearts. Respect is not a privilege. Respect is a choice, and sometimes that choice can save each other. The story of Seat 2A is not just a moment of conflict on a plane, but a vivid lesson about prejudice, power, and human dignity. Sociologists emphasize that the way we judge others in small everyday situations often reflects deeper values within ourselves. Evan Marshall demonstrated that calmness, self-control, and character are always stronger than any temporary power or arrogance. Meanwhile, Melissa Graham showed how hasty judgments can lead to unforeseen consequences. If you find this story thought-provoking about how we should behave, please like the video and subscribe to avoid missing other awakening stories. And don't forget to leave a short comment. Stand for justice to share your thoughts with the community.